I want to explore now the pathways and maybe some of the programs that you've heard about. Many churches that are on mission to God, I remember when the pathways idea hit me very forcefully. I'd been talking with a church that was trying to figure out how to get their people reaching out, but they were seeing a lot of people come to Christ, and they had a wonderful kind of environment for reaching out, and they were using a number of different programs, including Q-Place and Alpha and some other programs. But what I discovered is that they got this idea of pathways. The way the church had started is they'd written a letter to the whole community, and they had invited people to come to this new church, and they'd sort of ticked off all the other churches in the community because they'd written one of those letters that said, hey, we know you hate all the churches around here and wouldn't want to be in them because they're irrelevant and they aren't meeting your needs, but we would like to invite you to our church because it's different than all those other churches. And of course, all the other pastors in the community are trying like crazy too to reach out. And so they were a little upset, but it kind of worked. And they had a good turnout the first Sunday. And what they did, the pastor had such a heart for outreach that for the first 5 years, he didn't even take an offering during the Sunday services. And he would break in the middle of the service and serve donuts and coffee and juice. And every week he would get lots of people who came. Their kids would drag their parents along just for the donuts and the juice. And and he began, and he made sure he wasn't seeker targeted. You don't need to be seeker targeted, but you have to be seeker hospitable. You can't be seeker negative in Sunday services and in your main event. So one of the goals of Pathways is you need to have a Sunday service, however strong on teaching and worship, that's seeker hospitable. That's a critical piece of any pathway for a church. And I tell you, some churches are going to have to pay a sacrificial price to get their people on board that. But the Sunday service is just about the middle of the process for most people. A lot of people need a kind of presence on the front end that has to do with people getting out to neighborhoods and networks and connecting with people. And the first step often for our people in our churches is they need to belong out there before other people are going to come to believe. They need to be the bridge for people who don't know Jesus. They need to have their science fiction book clubs or their work coffee hours or their times together just building relationship around common issues. And that's the first step of the pathway. We need missional Christians. The church is where we gather to worship and get equipped, the church service. It's not the place where everything in the Christian life happens. And we desperately need missional Christians, and that's the first part of the pathway. But the next part, and this is key, the next part of the pathway is we have to have community to draw people into where they can belong before they believe and where they can seek out the truth. And that's where programs like Q-Place, like Alpha are fantastic. I've led Q-Place groups before, and it's really fun to be able to have a small group. And Q-Place teaches you need 3 of you who are missional Christians together. You need a threesome, a triad, because when you're on your own, again, you lose energy, you lose focus. And then the 3 of you invites friends in that neighborhood or network you belong to into a Q-Place group, a place where questions can get asked, a place where no question is too off the wall. My friend Nikki Gumbel in Alpha always likes to teach people and train people how you answer those off-the-wall questions. You say, that's interesting. I hadn't really thought about that before. What do other people think? And I know Q-Place teaches similar sorts of skills and abilities, and I've been trained in some of those. So you then have to have that place to draw people into. The next step, though, after that is they do need to connect to the church somehow. And the church needs those seeker, hospitable entry points. I would suggest every ministry in the church ought to think and dream and pray about how they could provide an entry point, whether it's a ministry for recovery whether it's a ministry to the homeless, whether it's the Sunday service, the high school group, the kids group, whatever group it is, there ought to be an entry point for people to come in that's hospitable. You can always tell if a place is hospitable by the language that gets used, whether it's in-group language or inclusive kind of language. You can always tell when you get to the point in the sermon where the application happens, and if it's just for Christians, committed Christians, then it wasn't seeker hospitable. One of the things I like to do is invite some of my seeking friends to a church I'm going to and have them tell me how they felt and whether they felt welcomed. But of course, then you need next steps. People sort of celebrate, begin to connect to God, but then they need to connect to other Christians. They need to contribute to the church, and then they need to communicate the good news about Jesus to others. They need to become missional Christians. So you begin to get a feel for that process. Missional Christians belonging out there before they believe, drawing people into seeking community, then inviting them to entry points into the church, then being invited into small group accountability fellowship, then contributing and serving, and then becoming a missional Christian. That's the circular process that characterizes churches on mission for God. Churches can do this. It's not going to happen overnight. But over 3-4 years, you would be shocked to see all your church might be for God, for the kingdom, and for outreach.